Welcome to Protecting Our Most Vital Resource, Working Together for Watershed Conservation. In this webinar series, we'll hear from 3 different regional initiatives about their watershed conservation work. In this part, listen as WHC's Director of Business Development, Sarah Cook, talks with Haley Paul of Rio Reimagined about their river restoration project in Arizona.
Hi there, good morning. Thank you for joining us on our third part of our discussion around water collaborations and partnerships funded by NIFWIF in the 5-Star program. We're joined during this piece by Haley Paul, who's the Arizona Policy Director for the National Audubon Society. In this role, she's really distilling complex natural resource policy and water management issues in particular, so that's why she's here, using a number of different platforms to do that. And more importantly, trying to demonstrate ways that water policy is critical to not only wildlife and birds as a species, but also human and built communities as well. And part of the role that she plays here in Arizona is she's also engaging on behalf of National Audubon Society with a collaborative called the Rio Reimagined, and specifically on one of the lower reaches of that, the Lower Gila River Collaborative. And in this, space, she's able to work within the context of larger regional water issues and scope, geography, and then also providing more opportunities and diversities to projects, in particular around private sector engagement. So we're really excited to have you, Haley. Thanks for joining WHC today. We were really glad to have a partner in the Lower Gila River Collaborative. We're going to call it LGRC for the attendees. Most importantly, because WHC is also working with this group and Rio Reimagined and other partners in the area. And we'd really love to hear a little bit about, from your perspective, what's happening at LGRC and how's Audubon supporting that effort?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I know when I first came to work for Audubon about 4 years ago, I was super inspired because there was an awesome video that Senator McCain's staff and others who kicked off this Rio Reimagined concept were showing, and truly, really inspirational. So just for the viewers to understand, this is, it will be a very massive, and it's at the very early stages of a multi-decade project. And essentially, we're looking to revitalize the corridor of the Salt and Gila rivers. And for context, Phoenix sits in the heart of the Salt River Valley, and the Salt River once used to flow through the heart of Phoenix, joining the Gila downstream. Today, it has, been dammed for water reservoirs upstream and water reliability purposes, but that has affected the river and the communities that used to kind of be near it. And so Rio Reimagined and the Lower Gila River Collaborative, I think, are really innovative and exciting opportunities for community, private, nonprofit, university to all come together and rally around, environmental restoration, economic development, workforce development, affordable housing. It's like all the classic urban challenges in one spot.
It's an interesting mix of stakeholders too. So, for those of you who are not familiar, Maricopa County, where Phoenix sits, has a number of towns, cities, and incorporated areas that kind of thrive along these 2 river channels that Haley was referring to. So there's a number of stakeholders involved, adjacent landowners, and also municipal interests. So tell us a little bit about how the Rio Reimagined effort, and specifically on the Lower Gila, how that brings stakeholders together for water.
Yeah, and I also want to note that it's, like you said, 1 county, 6 cities, 2 tribes, and then numerous nonprofits. So there are a true diverse set of interests surrounding this effort. And so for the Lower Gila River Collaborative, the LGRC, that is a bit downstream of what you could think of as, downtown Phoenix. And it's on the Gila River, which merges with the Salt River downstream of Phoenix. So we're talking the cities of Goodyear, Avondale, Buckeye, those types of areas. And really, it's an interesting mix down there of agriculture, rock products, mining sites, game and fish lands, habitat, and then like the river itself. And the river itself has some issues. There's a lot of salt cedar and non-native plants that have kind of taken over as the river has changed in terms of its hydrology over time, but there's so much potential. There's also a wastewater treatment plant that is served by 5 cities who deliver all their wastewater to this plant. It's cleaned up to really high standards and then released back into the river channel. And that provides incredible habitat and flowing river. So there's just a really interesting mix. And the Lower Gila River Collaborative is really trying to figure out, okay, in this stretch of the river, because inevitably we're going to have to focus, right? Like if we're going to make projects and progress happen, we're going to have to focus. So for this stretch of the river, what does the community want? What is, private business interested in? How can we collaborate to maximize, the best use of this corridor so that we, have recreational opportunities, environmental restoration. Maybe we can help private industry check a few boxes of things they already have to do, but we can all be more involved, to create better habitat. So quite a mix, but that's just a little snapshot of kind of the focus of the Lower Gila River Collaborative.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So if one of the primary objectives around this effort is collaboration, how do you know when you've been successful? And how do you know what's an important metric or result versus one that is technical, say monitoring quality, and which is one that might lead to scaling this up and replicating it back upstream or even in communities further downstream outside of the county?
That's a great question. I'm thinking for me and for a lot of the work that the collaborative I know has been engaged on, it's been spending the time to plan and then spending the time to ask the community what they want. I think those would be 2 early measures of success. So if we've made a plan, we've identified potential places for either restoration or recreation opportunities, or there's particular, pockets of private land that would be great if, a relationship could be built so that good things could happen on the ground. I think that would be an early measure of success. And then, of course, like you said, long-term technical things would be great, recognizing there's often many factors that go into a water quality metric, as we all know. However, I do think it's worth at least we put it out there, right? And it's something we monitor. Like, are we improving the water quality? How's the groundwater levels? Have the birds come back? I'm kind of obviously in an environmental focus, but I think there's tons of other ancillary benefits that cities, private industry could also kind of add on and, collaboratively create. And those are like kind of the metrics and the things we monitor and define for success.
Now, you had also mentioned an invasive species that is prolific in the western states in particular. And some of our other participants and partners, and certainly some of the corporations that Wildlife Habitat Council works with, are dealing with invasive species. Is that a big part of this in terms of working with landowners to remove it, manage it? How does that fit into this? Because I know that invasive species can also affect water quality, as well as the amount of water available, surface water anyway. And then, of course, has that biodiversity linkage that we're interested in. So kind of curious about that as well, because I think for the listeners of this event, how they can get involved would be something that they would love to walk away with. So tell us a little bit about some of the programming, maybe, even if it's not just invasive species.
For sure. So I'll start with the invasive species. And this is, especially in this corridor of the river, has been a big issue for many years. So invasive species like salt cedar tend to thrive because conditions on the river change such that the traditional cottonwood and willow and things that were reliant on more reliable water supplies died off. And so salt cedar comes in and it acts as surrogate habitat. So a lot of the time our birds do like the salt cedar. However, we know it causes problems because it can increase flood risk because it's changed the course of the river channel. it can increase fire risk, believe it or not. There's been some weird fires down in that corridor that's not good for the cities nearby. And then it's also just like a water management thing, like you mentioned. So the salt, it can be a quality issue, saltier water, as well as it takes up, plants use water, which I don't want to, be mad at them for that, but they are particularly good at thriving in these conditions. And so what's been great to see is the state legislature has known this is an issue, and there's been some really great advocates in terms of legislators from that district, and they have gotten funding to remove and replace. And so we were integral in helping making sure that that legislation wasn't just about removing tamarisk, removing salt cedar, but also replacing it with native vegetation that can thrive. We're not saying the whole region is going to turn back to cottonwood and willow, but perhaps mesquite, palo verde, some upland shrubs that are more tolerant of drought conditions if this river is, going to kind of stay variable. So that's one thing. And then you asked too about like metrics, I think you said, or how you can quantify this progress. So I think there's, of course, acres treated, but I think we always have to, and treated, I mean removal and replanting.
Restoration,
Yes, restoration. And as we all know, that happens. And just like with our forests, like whether you like it or not, unfortunately, then it does require, monitoring and ongoing maintenance. It's not just one and done, but it does help a lot if we can treat these acres. And I think you'll see that there's a lot of agricultural interests regarding that, and we've been good partners with them talking that through. I'd say like acres planted or acres restored is a good metric, and then the things we were kind of mentioning earlier about air quality or water quality improvements and water levels.
And I really appreciate you pointing out that it's cost and labor intensive to remove invasive species. And I think certainly some of our corporate partners understand that, as do some of our agency partners who are managing public lands. But the restoration is critical to that. It's not only for the rejuvenation of the watershed, but also for keeping the invasive kind of out of the area after you've spent so many resources on removing it. That's kind of interesting, and I'm really also appreciative that you brought up fire risk, because that, of course, is an issue that touches not only U.S.-based communities, but also in other parts of the world. So to be able to identify that and find that as a reason potentially for conducting these activities is another way that potentially we can rally support around these projects. Speaking of rallying support, in your experience, how does water unify communities, and also not just communities and all of us as citizens, but also the companies and towns and that rely on this resource? So how can water be a unifying factor in the collaborative approach that you're trying to engender as part of this project?
Yeah, I really appreciate that question because I think it's part of the reason I love working in the water space, because really we're all for water. Or there shouldn't be against. Obviously, people might differ in strategies, but I think a way that water unifies us is just the fact when you think about where water comes from and watershed health, and the fact that, just for example, the Salt and the Verde rivers, which feed modern day Phoenix, when those forests were designated by the United States government, it was for the specific purpose of water and like watershed protection. So we have forests today that we recreate in and enjoy, but really their first purpose was to ensure flowing water to the valley, which is interesting. And so I guess when I think of watershed, I think of all the things that we should all be mutually interested in to keep that water flowing and keep it healthy and keep it coming. So I think of fire, forest health and forest management. So we know our forests are overgrown, especially here in Arizona. There's been a lot of efforts to thin, to try to find use for the smaller diameter trees and restore our forest to a more healthy condition, so that when fire hits, because fire is a natural component of the ecosystem, it doesn't erupt in these catastrophic wildfires, which in the end emit a ton of carbon and don't do good things for the environment, and it's not good for habitat, right? So this balance of making sure we're managing our forests. So I think that's a unifying factor.
Interesting.
I also think habitat restoration is kind of similar with watershed health, but maybe it's more targeted. So when I think of the Rio Reimagined and the Lower Gila River Collaborative, it's not that we're trying to restore a flowing river through the whole whatever mile stretch from the salt through the Gila. It's more, where can we find those qualities, those factors that seem to align for business, for nonprofit, for water providers, that we say, okay, this is a good place to invest because it will do these things. It will help the water quality, whatever it is. And I think that's a way to unify across sectors, is like, these are the places we've decided are important to protect, and they have multiple benefits for doing so. So water is definitely a unifier. We all need it. We need it to be healthy and clean and reliable, maybe not abundant, but if it's reliable, that's obviously a win for wildlife and for people.
Yeah, and I think in particular, our corporate members, many of them have adopted, some of them quite publicly, some pretty serious water targets, not just around data collection, but also quality, improving equity, and other issues that are affecting communities that surround their operational assets. So I'd be curious also to hear kind of from you how you see the private sector. I mean, you've referred to it a little bit, but how specifically can they get involved, and what role do you think that plays, particularly linking to your expertise in kind of policy and issues, et cetera? So I was kind of curious to hear what your wish list would be, sort of from the private sector, on furthering these projects around the Lower Gila and the larger Rio Reimagined initiative.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, eternally, there's always funding needs. So funding on the ground projects, whether it's litter control or tree plantings or, bigger picture things like the plan, like contributing to, pitching in so that the collaborative can move forward with making their plan, involving the private sector. I think there's also just like time, so active engagement on the Lower Gila River Collaborative, for example. So those companies, those interests that are in that region, it would be amazing to have some further engagement, attend meetings, find out how you can get involved. And then there's the bigger picture of Rio Reimagined itself. So remember, Lower Gila River Collaborative is just a section of the Gila, and then the Rio Reimagined is kind of the bigger picture of the whole region. So taking a leadership role in that, there's going to be a nonprofit that's formed that kind of governs and guides what's going to happen. And I think it's really important that the private sector is at the table, because without you, we won't be as successful. I mean, it's just as simple as that. Having all the partners involved and going through the hard work of, negotiation and trading off and discussing and pros and cons, like, you guys are the experts on your sites and for your, business operations. And we can guess, but like, it would be really impactful for just further time and involvement, I think.
Okay. And I'm glad you mentioned that. So as part of this event, we'll be sharing for our attendees and viewers links to these initiatives, as well as all of our partners that we've spoken to across the country on this issue, so that they can access that. And of course, for any of you listening that know me and know WHC, we're currently working with a number of partners in the area and hosting an event this week, actually, to celebrate and recognize how canopy and restoration efforts can improve the watershed. So we're really looking forward to hearing from some of our members and audience members. And as part of this recording, we'll make sure we share some access information and details for your organizations. You've mentioned a couple of things that people can help you with, and it sounds like, based on your exposure and experience, both with National Audubon Society and then also within the context of Rio Reimagined and Lower Gila River Collaborative, what are some of the challenges that you face in this day-to-day kind of management or decision making? Because I know our corporate members face some similar challenges. it would be good to hear from your perspective what some of those barriers to success might be and how groups like WHC and our members can help overcome those.
I think for something I've noticed and I've seen others kind of experiencing is just the limitations of capacity, right? So having people to do the work, and when you're either looking for the dollars or trying to bring in the grant funds, it's hard to then also focus on like the bigger picture and the plan. But what I've seen be successful in that is there are public facilitation groups that maybe take that burden off of the day-to-day staff folks, and they run the meetings, solicit agenda items, kind of do that like care and feeding that it is needed for a group who essentially, although related by the cause, don't necessarily work together day to day, but they're coming together around a common issue. And so I think that's something that we all face is just capacity and time. And then, of course, the water challenges we're facing. They're coming at us hard and fast. It seems like it's really hard to keep up. The crisis is here, and we need to take action quicker maybe than we've been used to, and amplify and elevate that collaboration, because in the end, working together to solve these problems is going to be way more successful than like being mad and suing each other and not being collaborative. So I just think overall in the whole water picture, I'm both hopeful and worried. I could be both, that we just need to face reality a little quicker and start implementing solutions a little faster.
Yeah, and I think all of us share a little bit of that anxiety around the state of our environment, and our resources impacts on our ability to have clean air, clean water, have enough food on the table, and to be able to rely on that. So I think we all kind of can relate to that. So that's not too surprising. So I can take that now and flip it on its head. You've given us some ideas on how corporations can participate, and we'll definitely help you do that over time. And talked about some of the challenges, resource capacity, of course, time, and then kind of different levels of engagement. If you had a magic wand and you could wave that wand to do something for the lower Gila River stretch as part of the Rio Reimagined demonstration of success, what would you do? And how would you use that wand to further the project?
I think if my magic wand could be waved, it would be for again, more partners at the table in investing in this reach, whether that's time or money. And then once that table was set and we kind of had, and it's getting there, I'm not saying it's not, but it's just, and of course, more voices at the table. And then once set, I think if that table and that group of people looked at the opportunities and collectively decided, like, there is a really big opportunity in front of us with all the federal and state dollars that are coming or have arrived, and if that magic wand was waved such that we created a plan and it was consensus and we move forward together saying, this is the plan, we're going to go out and get these things and we're going to do these projects, that would be amazing. And it's happening, but I think to be able to capture the real opportunity we have in front of us with this federal and state money opportunity, I think the more we're coordinated, the better. And really just recognizing that we have big problems and we need all the players to help. That would be my magic wand wish.
Yeah, and I was going to end on that, but I have a follow-up question, and this is one that I even struggle to answer for our corporate partners, because for-profit entities aren't generally allowed to pursue these funds, not kind of in the community sense or tapping into some of the funding mechanisms you're alluding to with infrastructure bill and so on. So how can they participate? I mean, you mentioned time and money, but I don't know what that looks like. And if I'm, already, doing 3 jobs like yourself and working at a facility or in the area regionally even, and I hear that, I might want to do that, or I might want to mention it or participate, but I don't know how. And my understanding is limited of grants. So how can companies or private interests collaborate with the initiatives to support the overall success?
Yeah, I think that's where it's nice to be a nonprofit because we're very flexible, right? Like we can be the conduit, be the fiscal agent, be the idea generator. We can apply for the grants. And so again, if there's a process that's happening and you can dedicate a portion of a staff person, or at least, you know, ask for updates so that you're kind of aware of what's happening in these groups, that's all totally doable. And so I think if you're plugged in, whether that's actually attending meetings or just feeling like you kind of have a sense for what's going on, and then partnering with the people on the ground, that to me is a really great way to have success, because then, you know, you're not ultimately the one doing the work, but your involvement lends it that credibility as well. So I wanted to mention that, like, you know, businesses and their brands, and you have clout both at the state legislature and, you know, with the public. And so even as, you know, it's not simple, but even something as, you know, basic as messaging of the importance of water conservation, or, you know, why we should care about these issues. I think all of that could be on the table, and, you know, we're eager to partner, eager to play, and recognize that we would be stronger together if we all kind of had an agreed plan. And I think that's what's nice about plans too, is like, it's an outline for where we want to go, and that can change. But if there's a kind of an agreement of like, this is what we're going to do, I think that builds trust, because trust and success. So once we have success, then that leads to another, leads to another. And I think so much of the time we feel like we don't know where to start. And so I think plugging into some of these existing efforts, it's really nice that the Rio Reimagined is so cohesive and alive. And it's something that I would recommend, you know, plugging into, or, you know, if you're in Arizona and you want to talk, happy to have more conversations and plug in with the right folks that I know of. So
great. So we'll make sure, again, that as part of this event, that we share your information with our audience. And I do appreciate all of your time today, your insights about the programming here in Maricopa County, and in particular along the Rio Reimagined corridor. It's really a vital water course for millions of people, as well as the industries that work with WHC. So really appreciate your insights and you sharing that information. And hopefully we'll have an opportunity to work with you directly in some of the other programming we're doing in the area. So thank you for your time today, Haley, and we appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, and look forward to staying in touch with you all.
Great. Thank you. Bye.
This webinar series was made possible through funding from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation's 5-Star and Urban Waters Restoration Grant Program. For more about WHC's support of 5-Star, or to learn how you can get involved and find funding for your water projects, visit wildlifehc.org/5star.